Hi folks, this is Anne-Marie O'Keehan again from the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. As hopefully you might know already, I manage the BorderPeople project, and we hope to gather up some information that is useful to people who live in the island of Ireland, especially those people who live along the border and people who cross the border occasionally and sometimes very regularly, or cross-border students, or workers, or shoppers, or family members, many others. We often get questions of a very varied nature, and I suppose with Brexit, many of the answers that we'll be able to provide to people will be very different. And we're going to just have a look at that now today in just a few minutes. I'm hopefully going to share my screen with you, and I hope that you can see that. That is a picture of a screenshot of our website at the moment, and you can see the web address is borderpeople.info. And much of the information that I'll be sharing with you over these moments will be available on the website. So let me see. Make sure that I'm sharing everything right. Okay, I am. So many of the questions that we get, there are many common questions, and the types of issues that frequently come up are cross-border employment, tax implications, access to healthcare where we live and where we work, again, access to social security, retirement, pensions, and actually physically commuting across the border, driving license and insurance, registering cars. Those type of questions frequently come up, and much of the information on our website is based on EU rights to free movement, and much of the information comes from the EU legislation. And of course, Brexit, as I've said, will change all of that. So instead of looking to the EU rules, we're going to need to look to other places, to the withdrawal agreement, to the common travel area, and then when it's available, we'll also consider rights within the future deal between the UK and the EU. So before we can even touch on the topics, we have to have a look at where do the rights, where are the answers, before we delve into the topics, and we'll touch on the topics in another podcast. So currently, because we're still in the transition period, we know that the EU rules still apply here. Nothing has really changed on a day-to-day basis, and they won't change until 11 p.m. on the 31st of December. Now, then the withdrawal agreement kicks in, and the common travel area rules also take a force that they maybe haven't done for many, many years beyond or before we joined the European Union. And then, of course, whenever we know it, whenever we find out a little bit more about it, we know that there will be some answers found then, of course, within the future deal, but we don't have that information at the moment. So when people come to us with questions, we're going to have to consider whether or not they are maintaining then their rights within some rights from the EU, because they've got some scope, they're within the withdrawal agreement. So not everyone will be included within the withdrawal agreement. Personally, I live in Armagh, I work in Armagh, so I won't be captured within the withdrawal agreement. So it focuses, there's a huge element of the withdrawal agreement, a massive legal document, and it focuses, one portion of it focuses purely about citizens. So the 3 million plus EU citizens who are legally residing in the UK by the end of transition. So by the end of this year, there's still right to free movement right up until the 31st of December. Those individuals will have to apply to the UK settlement scheme before the June of next year. Also within the withdrawal agreement, it will capture UK citizens who are legally residing in the EU, again by the end of transition. So where free movement rights remain until the end of the year. So legally resident, that's a key phrase in there, and it's legally resident under the EU rules to free movement. So we're thinking of people who are engaging their rights, especially in this jurisdiction where they cross the border. So workers, students, those are set sufficient. Family members as well are also included, because we have a right under the EU rules to have a family life. So family members who exist generally by the end of the transition. So a spouse, a registered partner, parents, grandparents, grandchildren, children who are born before or after transition, they'll also be protected within the withdrawal agreement. And then importantly for this jurisdiction, frontier workers and self-employed workers, they will also be protected in the countries where they work. So those are the citizens, but what rights are we talking about? So rights that we currently have at the moment under the EU rules. Right to residence, where we can move across the border if we wish. Social security is protected as well. All those rights currently under the EU, retaining rights to healthcare and our state pensions, exporting benefits. If we live on one side of the border and work on the other, all of those will be protected within the withdrawal agreement. The right to be self-employed or employed, and all those workers' rights, currently based on EU law, they'll be protected within the withdrawal agreement. And then frontier workers, and of course it's really important here because there's many people, thousands of people who cross the border every day to go to work. And they're usually they're employed or self-employed, and their rights will be protected. Qualifications as well, they're going to continue travelling across the border. Those that are currently recognised, they will continue to be recognised and safeguarded within the withdrawal agreement. Any pending decisions that are currently in process, they'll be honoured as well. So they're the types of rights that will be protected. Now, in order to engage those rights, then I mentioned a moment ago the EU settlement scheme. So that's the UK's scheme, where EU citizens who are not British or Irish, if they're living in Northern Ireland, they'll need to apply to this scheme to continue living in Northern Ireland or any part of the UK. Now, Irish citizens don't need to apply, but they can if they wish to. And it's actually really important if there is a concern about family members. If they're family members from non-EU places, they will have a continued right to be with them. That I mentioned about the right to a family life. So for Irish citizens, that would be probably one of the main reasons that they would choose potentially to apply to the EU settlement scheme. Now, in Northern Ireland, there are people who are born in Northern Ireland and choose to be Irish, but under the Home Office rules at the moment, those individuals are automatically deemed to be British, and then they decide then to add on Irish citizenship. So that may not be that well known, but there has been a special exemption for family members of those relevant people in Northern Ireland. Their family members from non-EU places can actually also apply to the EU settlement scheme. Now, there's only a short period of time left to apply to the scheme. The application is online and it's free of charge. And for the vast majority of people, it's actually quite straightforward. And it also applies, there is a deadline for actually arriving in the UK for the majority of relevant people. They'll have to arrive by the end of this year. And the application process, so they can arrive on the very last day of this year, and the application process will actually stay open until the end of June next year. And then successful applicants will be awarded settled status if they've been here for 5 years or more and can prove it, or pre-settled status if they've been here for a shorter period of time. Now, Advice NI they have a free service. They're approved to provide expert advice on this particular topic, and it's free. And they have a free phone number, 0800 138 6545. And they've also an email address if you want to get in touch, euss@adviceni.net. Now, our frontier workers, because they are not actually going to move across the border to live, they won't be eligible for the settlement scheme because there's residence required there. Now, instead, they will require a workers' registration scheme, and the withdrawal agreement has a special paragraph that refers to frontier workers, and it mentions that workers will be able to obtain a document certifying their rights. So we only know of one scheme at the moment. It's the UK government scheme. We don't know of a similar one in the South. But what we do know, and we've only recently learned, that there is legislation waiting to go through Westminster, and it refers to the Frontier Worker Permit Scheme. The information from the UK government states that the applications are very much like the settlement scheme. They'll be free of charge. They'll be made online. They can be made, this one will be able to be made from within or outside the UK. And the government expects the application process to be open in good time before the end of the year, but we're not sure. We're getting quite close to the end of the year, and the legislation isn't through yet. It applies to EEA citizens. They can apply, but they cannot also be British citizens. So we're waiting on some clarification for that, because that would be relevant. It would rule out maybe someone who, I've used myself as an example. I live in Armagh, work in Armagh. If I decided to move 10 miles down the road, that would bring me into the Republic of Ireland. But if I wanted to keep my job in Armagh, so I've been born in Armagh, so I'm deemed to be automatically British by the Home Office. And that would rule me out then of applying as a resident of the Republic. They would deem me to be a British citizen, and I would not be eligible then for the scheme. This is with the information we have now, and the legislation hasn't gone through. So we're waiting on clarification, and as I say, it might be tweaked before it goes through. So we have to wait to see what will happen for British citizens. Irish citizens, like the EU settlement scheme, they will not be required to apply to the scheme for a work permit, but they can if they wish. Now, if they choose not to, then we're going to be looking for rights to employment and to enter Northern Ireland under different rules. So of course the common travel area kicks in here. So the rights of Irish and British citizens are protected to a degree within the common travel area. And these rules were established back in the 1920s. And they come with rights that seem to be similar to the EU rules. So the right to enter the other jurisdiction without a visa, right to employment, to social security, to education, healthcare, and some voting rights. So some of these are very similar to the EU rules. These common travel area rules only apply to British and Irish citizens. So there's a big difference there. So our family members and our friends from other places will not be protected by the common travel area rules. But at least they are there, and they do capture and provide some safeguards for British and Irish across the border and between the two islands. Now, they don't have the same legal footing that the EU rules do have, but there is a new social security arrangement, a convention that was signed last year, which does put the social security settings on a bit of a better legal footing. And we'll have more information about that whenever it becomes available. So that gives you an idea of the places that we're going to look for the answers to some of those topics that I mentioned beforehand. So lots of this information will be available on our website, that's borderpeople.info. And as I said, there'll be other podcasts now to follow that will touch on those other topics that we mentioned: employment, taxation, social welfare, healthcare, and all the rest. So I hope that gives you a bit of a flavour for where we are at the moment. All the best. Bye.